The candle flame trembled against her fingertips as the shadow fell across the chapel door. She had waited here through 17 winters, through whispered prayers and silent tears. But tonight the air carried something different, a presence that made her breath catch like a bird against glass. The stone beneath her knees had grown cold, yet her skin burned where his gaze touched her, though she dared not turn to meet those eyes she had glimpsed only in dreams and fears. When his voice broke the silence, low and certain as thunder, her heart stopped between one prayer and the next, suspended in the space where hope meets ruin. Before we dive into the story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The bell tower of St. Morwen's struck midnight when Lydia finally lifted her head from the prayer book. The words had blurred hours ago, dissolving into meaningless shapes beneath her tears, but she had remained kneeling because there was nowhere else to go. The orphanage had released her at 18 with nothing but the dress on her back and a letter stating that no family had ever claimed her. 21 now, she existed in the margins of the village like a shadow cast by no light, cleaning floors in houses where she was invisible, mending clothes for women who would not meet her eyes. The chapel had become her refuge in these midnight hours when sleep eluded her like everything else good in this world. Here, among the worn wooden pews and stained glass windows that caught moonlight like trapped prayers, she could pretend that someone listened to her whispered confessions. The stone floor had memorized the shape of her knees, and the altar candles knew the salt taste of her tears. Tonight felt different. The air pressed against her skin with the weight of anticipation, and the shadows seemed to move independent of their sources. She had heard the rumors that spread through the village like fever, whispers of the Lord of Ravenshollow returning after 20 years of absence. Some said he had died in foreign wars. Others claimed he had never been human at all, that the darkness had finally called him home. The villagers crossed themselves when they spoke his name, if they dared speak it at all. Lydia had seen him once, when she was 17 and still believed in miracles. He had ridden through the village square on a horse black as midnight, his long coat billowing behind him like wings. Even from a distance, she had felt the pull of his presence, the way the very air seemed to bend around him. His face had been turned away, but something in the set of his shoulders, the elegant line of his silhouette, had lodged itself in her memory like a splinter of dark glass. The sound of footsteps on stone made her freeze. Heavy boots echoed through the chapel, each step deliberate and unhurried. She did not turn, could not turn, though every instinct screamed at her to run. The footsteps stopped just behind her, and she felt the weight of his presence like a physical thing pressing against her spine. "You pray for the dead," his voice came, deep and cultured, with an accent that spoke of distant places and ancient bloodlines. "I can smell the grief on you." Still she did not turn, her hands clasped tighter around the prayer book until her knuckles went white. "I pray for the forgotten," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the sacred silence. A soft sound that might have been laughter. "And who has forgotten you, little sparrow?" The endearment fell from his lips like a caress, and she shivered despite the warmth that seemed to radiate from his presence. Slowly, as if pulled by invisible strings, she turned to face him. He was beautiful in the way that dangerous things are beautiful, sharp-edged and compelling, with eyes the color of winter storms. His dark hair was longer than fashion dictated, framing a face that belonged on cathedral carvings of fallen angels. He wore all black, from his perfectly tailored coat to his leather boots, and in the candlelight his pale skin seemed to glow with its own inner fire. "Everyone," she answered honestly, because there seemed no point in lying to a man who looked at her as if he could see straight through to her soul. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of him, rain and cedar and something darker, something that made her pulse quicken with a fear that felt remarkably like desire. "Not everyone," he said softly. "I have been watching you." The words should have terrified her. Instead, they settled over her like a benediction she had waited her whole life to receive. "Why?" "Because you are not afraid of the dark." His hand, lifted toward her face, stopped just short of touching. "Because you kneel in empty churches and pray for souls that no one else remembers. Because you carry sadness like other women carry flowers, as if it were something beautiful." Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her with such careful attention, as if her words mattered as if she mattered. "I don't even know your name." "Sebastian." The name rolled off his tongue like a secret shared. Lord Sebastian Ashworth, though the title means little now. Most call me the Crow, for obvious reasons. He gestured to his black attire with a self-deprecating smile that transformed his severe features into something almost human. Lydia, she offered in return, though the name felt small and plain in the sacred space between them. Lydia. He spoke like a prayer, like a vow. Tell me, Lydia who prays for the forgotten, do you believe in redemption? The question hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning she could not quite grasp. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the stained glass windows and sending shadows dancing across the chapel walls. The candle flames bent toward him as if even fire recognized his dominion. I believe in hope, she said carefully. I believe that no soul is so lost that it cannot find its way home. Something flickered across his features. Pain, perhaps, or surprise. Even souls stained with blood? Even those who have done things that God himself might not forgive. She studied his face in the wavering candlelight, saw the weight he carried in the shadows beneath his eyes, the careful control in the set of his jaw. Especially those, she said softly. The silence stretched between them, alive with possibility and peril. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion barely held in check. Come to Raven's Hollow tomorrow. At sunset, I have something to show you. Before she could answer, before she could ask what he meant, he was gone. The chapel door swung shut behind him with a whisper of silk and shadow, leaving her alone with the dying candles and the echo of her own heartbeat. She knelt there until dawn touched the windows, her prayers forgotten, her mind full of storm-gray eyes and the promise of answers to questions she had not known how to ask. The next day passed like a fever dream. Lydia went through the motions of her daily tasks, sweeping the baker's floor, mending torn petticoats for the mayor's wife, tending the small garden behind the church, but her thoughts remained fixed on the chapel and the man who had materialized from shadow to speak her name like a benediction. Raven's Hollow sat on the hill, overlooking the village like a brooding giant. Its towers pierced the sky, dark stone weathered by centuries of storms. No lights had shone in its windows for 20 years, but tonight, as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Lydia saw the warm glow of candles beginning to bloom in the tall windows. She climbed the winding path as shadows gathered in the valleys below. The massive gates stood open, wrought iron twisted into shapes that might have been roses or thorns, depending on how the light caught them. The courtyard beyond was overgrown with wild roses that had gone feral in the years of abandonment, their thorns sharp enough to draw blood, their blooms the color of old wine. He was waiting for her on the steps of the main hall, no longer dressed in black, but in deep burgundy that made his pale skin luminous in the dying light. When he saw her approach, a smile touched his lips, not the careful, controlled expression she had seen in the chapel, but something warmer, more human. "You came," he said, and she heard the relief in his voice, as if he had truly doubted she would. "I said I would." She stopped at the bottom of the steps, suddenly shy in the face of his obvious wealth and breeding. Her simple brown dress seemed shabby against the grandeur of the castle, her worn boots inappropriate for such stones. As if reading her thoughts, he descended the steps and offered her his arm. "None of that matters here," he said gently. "Raven's Hollow has seen emperors and beggars, saints and sinners. It judges no one by their clothing." His touch sent warmth racing up her arm, and she allowed him to lead her into the great hall. Inside, hundreds of candles burned in silver sconces, their light dancing across tapestries and paintings that spoke of wealth accumulated over generations. A fire roared in the massive hearth, and the air smelled of wood smoke and roses and something indefinably masculine that she was beginning to associate with Sebastian himself. "This is what I wanted to show you," he said, leading her to a portrait that dominated one wall. It showed a woman with dark hair and sad eyes, dressed in the fashion of perhaps 50 years past. Around her throat, she wore a necklace of remarkable beauty, silver and sapphires that seemed to capture starlight. Lydia stared at the portrait, a strange recognition stirring in her chest. She began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the impossible thought. "Like you." His voice was quiet, heavy with old pain. "Her name was Elena. She was my wife." The words hit her like a physical blow. Of course he had been married. A man like him, with his title and wealth and devastating beauty, would have had his choice of women. She stepped back from the portrait, from him, wrapping her arms around herself as if to hold the pieces together. She managed to ask. She died 20 years ago. The fever took her in the space of 3 days. His voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the grief underneath, raw as an open wound. I left Ravenshollow that same night and swore never to return. But you did return. She forced herself to look at him instead of the painted face that might have been her reflection in different clothes, a different time. Because I saw you in the village square 3 months ago, and for a moment I thought. He dragged a hand through his dark hair, the careful composure cracking. I thought she had come back to me. The admission hung between them like a bridge, over an abyss. Lydia stared at him, seeing the raw honesty in his face, the vulnerability he was offering her like a gift. I am not her, she said softly. No, he moved closer, slowly, as if approaching a wild creature that might bolt. You are not her. You are yourself. Lydia who prays for the forgotten, who carries sadness like beauty, who believes in redemption for the damned. You are nothing like her, and everything like her, and I. His voice broke slightly. I cannot tell if you are a blessing or a curse. She reached up without thinking and touched his face, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his cheekbone. His skin was warm, human, real. Perhaps both, she whispered. He caught her hand in his, pressed it flat against his cheek. Stay, he said, the word barely a breath. Stay the night. Let me pretend, just for one night, that ghosts can be laid to rest and lost things can be found again. Every practical thought in her head screamed warnings. She barely knew this man, this lord who lived alone in his castle of shadows and memories. But her heart, that treacherous organ that had never learned caution, whispered that she had been waiting her whole life for someone to ask her to stay. One night, she agreed, and watched something like hope dawn in his storm-gray eyes. He showed her to a room that was clearly meant for a lady, all silk hangings and delicate furniture, with a view of the rose garden where moonlight turned the blooms to silver. The bed was enormous, piled with soft blankets and pillows that smelled of lavender. A fire burned in the grate, casting dancing shadows on the walls. This was Elena's room, he said quietly from the doorway. I have not entered it since she died. Lydia turned from the window, where she had been watching the moon rise over the garden. Then why? Because you are not a ghost, he said firmly. And neither am I, though I have lived like one for 20 years. You deserve beauty, Lydia. You deserve softness and light, and all the things this world has denied you. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the luxury she had never dared dream of. She touched the silk curtains with wondering fingers, ran her hands over the carved headboard, marveled at the wardrobe full of gowns in shades of blue and green and silver. On the dressing table sat the necklace from the portrait, sapphires and silver that caught the firelight like captured stars. She lifted it with careful hands, felt the weight of it, the perfection of the craftsmanship. When she fastened it around her throat, it fit as if it had been made for her. A soft knock interrupted her wonderment. Come in, she called, expecting a servant. Instead, Sebastian entered, carrying a tray with wine and delicate cakes. He had changed into simpler clothes, dark trousers and a white shirt open at the throat, and his hair was damp as if from washing. When he saw her wearing Elena's necklace, he stopped dead, the tray nearly slipping from his hands. Dear God, he breathed. Self-conscious, she reached for the clasp. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No, his voice was sharp, then gentler. No, don't take it off. It suits you. She would have wanted someone to wear it, someone who would appreciate its beauty. He set the tray on a small table by the fire and poured wine into crystal glasses that caught the light like prisms. When he offered her one, their fingers brushed, and she felt that same electric connection she had experienced in the chapel. Tell me about her, she said, settling into one of the chairs by the fire. About Elena. His face grew thoughtful as he took the chair across from her. She was everything I was not, light and laughter and joy. She could make flowers bloom, just by smiling at them, could turn the gloomiest room bright with her presence. Everyone loved her, including you, especially me. He stared into the fire, lost in memory. I was a darker creature even then, too serious, too caught up in the responsibilities of the estate and the title. She taught me to laugh, to see beauty in simple things. She saved me from becoming the monster I feared I was destined to be. And when she died, I became that monster anyway. His smile was bitter. I shut myself away from the world, let the estate fall into decay, ignored my duties and my people. I told myself I was honoring her memory, but I was really just indulging in self-pity and grief. Lydia set down her wine and leaned forward. But you came back. You returned to Ravenshollow, to your responsibilities. Because of you. His eyes met hers across the firelight. Because I saw you in that village square, alone and beautiful and sad, and I remembered what Elena used to say about lost souls finding each other. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending shadows dancing across the walls. The fire crackled in the grate, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called to its mate. I am not her replacement, Lydia said carefully. I know. He rose from his chair and knelt beside hers, taking her hands in his. I would not ask you to be. You are yourself, Lydia, unique and precious and perfect exactly as you are. I do not want to resurrect the past. I want to build something new, something that honors what was while embracing what could be. She looked down at their joined hands, his pale and elegant, hers small and work-roughened. I have nothing to offer you. No dowry, no family, no connections. I am nobody. You are somebody to me. His voice was fierce with conviction. You are the woman who kneels in empty churches and prays for forgotten souls. You are the one who believes in redemption, who carries sadness like beauty, who looked at a broken man in the darkness and offered him hope. You are everything, Lydia. Everything. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she blinked them back, still not quite able to believe that this was real, that a man like Sebastian could want someone like her. What are you asking of me? Stay, he said simply. Not just tonight, but always. Be my companion, my partner, my salvation. Help me rebuild Ravenshollow, restore it to what it once was. Help me remember how to live instead of merely existing. The proposal was unconventional, lacking the pretty speeches and formal declarations she had read about in books. But it was honest and real, and more than she had ever dared hope for. She thought of her lonely life in the village, the cold room above the baker's shop, the endless days of being invisible and unwanted. Then she looked at Sebastian's face in the firelight, beautiful and scarred and hopeful, and made her choice. Yes, she whispered. His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles with reverent tenderness. We will take it slowly, he promised. There is no rush, no pressure. We have time, Lydia. All the time in the world. That night, she slept in Elena's bed surrounded by silk and softness, the sapphire necklace warm against her throat. In the morning, she woke to sunlight streaming through tall windows and the sound of Sebastian's voice in the garden below, directing workers who had arrived to begin the restoration of Ravenshollow. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Lydia's life. By day, she worked alongside Sebastian to return the castle to its former glory, polishing silver, mending tapestries, overseeing the cleaning and repair of rooms that had been closed for 20 years. By evening, they dined together in the great hall, talking of books and music and dreams for the future. He courted her with careful attention, bringing her flowers from the wild garden, reading to her by the fire, teaching her to dance in the restored ballroom under the light of 100 candles. His touch remained respectful, gentle, never presuming beyond what she offered freely. But there were moments, when he helped her down from the carriage after a visit to the village, when he reached past her to fetch a book from a high shelf, when he looked at her across the dinner table with something dark and hungry in his eyes, when she felt the leashed power in him, the intensity he kept carefully controlled. The villagers whispered, of course. Lydia heard the rumors when she went to market, that the Crow Lord had taken the orphan girl as his mistress, that she was bewitched or mad, or both to live alone with him in his castle of shadows. Some crossed themselves when they saw her. Others looked at her with envy and spite. Lady Marguerite Ashworth arrived on a Tuesday morning in a carriage black as mourning, attended by 2 footmen and a maid who looked as sour as her mistress. Sebastian's aunt was everything Lydia was not, titled, wealthy, beautiful in the cold way of marble statues. She swept into Raven's Hollow as if she owned it, her pale blue eyes taking in every detail with sharp assessment. "Sebastian, darling," she purred, offering her gloved hand to be kissed. "You look well. Country air agrees with you. Aunt Marguerite." His voice was carefully neutral. "This is unexpected." "Is it?" "When word reaches London that my nephew has emerged from his hermitage and taken up with some village girl, naturally I must come to see for myself." Her gaze found Lydia, who was descending the main staircase in one of Elena's gowns, deep green silk that complemented her dark hair. "Ah, and this must be the little nobody who thinks to be mistress of Raven's Hollow." The insult was delivered with perfect politeness, wrapped in silk and poison honey. Lydia felt her cheeks burn, but kept her chin high. "I am Lydia," she said simply. "How quaint." Marguerite's smile was sharp as winter. "Tell me, my dear, what precisely are your qualifications for managing a household of this magnitude? Your family connections, your training in the social graces." "That's enough." Sebastian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Lydia is my guest, and will be treated with respect while she is under my roof." "Your guest?" Marguerite laughed, the sound like breaking glass. "Oh, Sebastian, surely you do not mean to present this creature in society? The scandal alone would destroy what remains of your reputation." "My reputation is my own concern. And what of your duty to the family name? To your future heirs? This girl has no bloodline, no fortune, no connections of any value. She is pretty enough, I grant you, but there are dozens of suitable young ladies who would leap at the chance to be Countess of Raven's Hollow." Each word was a careful thrust designed to wound, and Lydia felt them like physical blows. She had known this would come eventually, the confrontation with Sebastian's world, the reminder of how vast the gulf was between them. But hearing it spoken aloud, with such casual cruelty, made her want to run back to her little room above the baker's shop and pretend this had all been a beautiful dream. "There will be no countess," Sebastian said quietly. "I have no intention of marrying again." The words hit Lydia like a slap. She had known he had not spoken of marriage, had been careful not to assume or expect, but some foolish part of her heart had hoped that what was growing between them might lead to something permanent, something real. Marguerite's smile was triumphant. "Then what is she? Your mistress? Your temporary amusement? Really, Sebastian, even you can do better than a village orphan with no name and no prospects." "She is under my protection," he said, but his voice lacked the fierce conviction it had held the night he first asked her to stay. "That is all you need to know." Protection. The word echoed in Lydia's mind like a death knell. Not love, not partnership, not a future together. Protection, the sort of thing a powerful man might offer to a stray dog or a wounded bird. "I see." Marguerite looked between them with satisfied malice. How fortunate for her to have found such a generous patron. "I trust she appreciates the temporary nature of your charity." The conversation continued, but Lydia heard none of it. She moved through the rest of the day like a sleepwalker, smiling and nodding, and playing the perfect hostess while her heart slowly crumbled to ash. At dinner, she sat in her usual place at Sebastian's right hand, wearing Elena's necklace and Elena's dress, and listened to Marguerite regale them with gossip from London society, a world where Lydia would never belong, could never hope to fit. That night, she stood at the window of Elena's room and stared out at the garden where she and Sebastian had walked together in the evenings, talking of books and dreams and the future they might build together. How naive she had been to think she could belong here, that a man like Sebastian could ever see her as more than a temporary comfort, a pleasant distraction from his grief. The soft knock she had been expecting came just after midnight. Sebastian entered without waiting for permission, still dressed in his dinner clothes, but with his cravat loosened and his hair disheveled, as if he had been running his hands through it. "You have been avoiding me," he said without preamble. "I have been thinking about what my aunt said." It was not a question. Lydia turned from the window to face him. In the moonlight, he looked like the fallen angel she had first thought him, beautiful and damned and forever out of reach. She spoke the truth. She spoke poison designed to hurt you. But it was true poison. Lydia moved to the dressing table and began removing Elena's necklace with fingers that trembled only slightly. "I am nobody, Sebastian. A village orphan with no name and no prospects. What am I doing here, playing dress-up in a dead woman's clothes, pretending I could ever be part of your world. He crossed the room in 3 swift strides and caught her hands, stilling them on the clasp. You are not pretending anything. You belong here. As what? The question was barely a whisper. Your mistress, your temporary amusement, your charity case. Pain flashed across his features. You know you are more than that. Do I? She pulled free of his grasp and faced him fully. You said yourself that you have no intention of marrying again. So what am I, Sebastian? What future do we have together? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths and careful evasions. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I cannot marry you. The words were like a physical blow, even though she had known they were coming. Because I am beneath you. Because I killed my wife. The confession hung in the air between them like a curse. Lydia stared at him, seeing the raw agony in his face, the self-loathing that ate at him like poison. That is impossible, she said carefully. You told me she died of fever. His laugh was bitter as winter wind. She died because of me. Because I was selfish and weak, and could not bear to let her go when the fever took hold. I made a bargain, Lydia. I traded my soul for one more night with her, and when the sun rose, she was gone anyway. Dead because I interfered with the natural order, because I could not accept that some things are beyond our control. She felt the world tilting around her, everything she thought she knew shifting like sand. What kind of bargain? The kind that damns a man for eternity. He moved to the fireplace and braced his hands against the mantel, his head bowed. I sought out a witch, a woman who claimed she could cheat death itself. She told me the price, my humanity, my soul, my ability to love purely without destroying what I touched. I paid it gladly, thinking I was saving Elena. Instead, I condemned her to a death far more terrible than fever. Sebastian, I am cursed, Lydia. Everything I love I destroy. Everyone who gets too close to me suffers for it. Elena was only the first. He turned to face her, and she saw the truth written in his storm-gray eyes, the weight of 20 years of guilt and self-imposed exile. I cannot marry you because I will not watch you die the way she did. I will not be the instrument of your destruction. The pieces fell into place like a puzzle solving itself. His isolation, his reluctance to fully commit, the way he sometimes looked at her as if she were already lost to him. Is that why you came back? To warn me away? I came back because I am selfish, he said quietly. Because 20 years of loneliness taught me that some hungers are stronger than honor. But I will not make the same mistake twice. I will not let my weakness destroy you. Lydia stared at him, this man who had shown her kindness and beauty, and a glimpse of what love might feel like. She thought of his careful courtship, his respectful distance, the way he held himself back even in his most unguarded moments. She thought of the villagers who crossed themselves at his name, the stories that painted him as something more than human. Do you believe it? She asked finally. This curse. He looked surprised by the question. I lived it. That is not what I asked. She moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, the fine lines that spoke of years of guilt and sorrow. Do you believe that you are cursed? That you are damned? That you will destroy everything you touch? I know I am. Then you are a fool. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she did not soften them. You are not cursed, Sebastian. You are grieving. You have been grieving for 20 years, punishing yourself for a woman's death that was never your fault to begin with. His face went white. You do not understand. I understand perfectly. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. You lost the woman you loved, and instead of accepting that death is part of life, that loss is the price we pay for loving, you convinced yourself that you were responsible. You created a narrative where you were the villain instead of simply a man who loved too much to let go. The witch was a charlatan who took advantage of a desperate man. Her voice was fierce with conviction. There are no curses, Sebastian. There is only grief and guilt and the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of senseless loss. For a moment, she thought he might believe her. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the wall of certainty he had built around his pain. Then it was gone, shuttered behind familiar defenses. You cannot know that, he said, stepping back from her touch. You were not there. You did not see what I saw, feel what I felt. No, but I know you. She let her hands fall but did not retreat. I have lived with you for weeks, watched you with your servants, your tenants, the villagers who depend on you. I have seen your kindness, your generosity, your care for others. If you were truly cursed, truly damned, would you be capable of such goodness? Appearances can deceive. Not to this extent. Not for this long. She moved to the window, looking out at the garden where roses bloomed despite 20 years of neglect. You want to know what I think happened to Elena? I think she died because people die, Sebastian. Because fever takes some and spares others according to no logic we can understand. I think you could not accept the randomness of it, the helplessness, so you created a story where you had control, where her death meant something beyond simple tragedy. And the witch, the bargain. Did you actually see anything supernatural happen? Or did you give gold to a woman who told you what you wanted to hear, made you feel like you were doing something instead of nothing? She turned back to him, seeing the doubt creeping into his eyes. People die, Sebastian. Good people, innocent people, beloved people. It is the most natural thing in the world, and also the most impossible to accept. But it does not make you a monster. The silence stretched between them, thick with possibility and fear. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. What if you are wrong? What if I am everything I believe myself to be, and my presence in your life brings you nothing but sorrow? Then I will face that sorrow when it comes. She moved to him, took his hands in hers, felt the tremor that ran through him at her touch. But I will not let fear of what might happen rob me of what is happening now. I will not let your ghost steal my future. Lydia, I love you. The words came out in a rush, 3 small syllables that changed everything between them. I love your kindness and your darkness, your guilt and your goodness. I love the way you read to me by the fire, the way you dance with me in empty ballrooms, the way you look at me as if I am something precious. I love you, Sebastian, curses and all. He stared at her as if she had struck him, his face cycling through disbelief, hope, and terror in rapid succession. You cannot. I can and I do. She lifted their joined hands and pressed them against her heart. Feel that. That is my choice, freely made. Not Elena's ghost, not your aunt's expectations, not the villagers' gossip. Mine. I could destroy you. You could, she agreed. And I could leave you tomorrow and marry the baker's son and live a perfectly safe, perfectly ordinary life. But I would rather have 1 year of loving you than 50 years of safety without you. The admission hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. She watched him struggle with it, saw the moment when 20 years of self-imposed isolation cracked and something new began to emerge from the ruins. I am not a good man, he said finally. I am not a good woman. I am selfish and stubborn, and far too fond of books for my own good. I pray for the dead and talk to myself when I think no one is listening. I will never be the perfect lady your aunt thinks you need. I do not want a perfect lady. His voice was rough with emotion barely held in check. I want you. God help me. I want you so much it terrifies me. Then have me. She stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the cedar and rain scent that was uniquely his. Not as your mistress, or your charity case, or your temporary amusement. Have me as your equal, your partner, your wife. Lydia, marry me, Sebastian. The words came out clear and strong, without hesitation or doubt. Not because society expects it, not because your aunt demands it, but because we choose each other. Because love should be celebrated, not hidden away like something shameful. He cupped her face in his hands, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. I am not worthy of you. Neither am I of you. We will have to grow into worthiness together. His smile was like sunrise after the longest night, full of wonder and disbelief and dawning joy. You would truly take a man like me? Knowing what you know, believing what you believe. I would take you exactly as you are, scars and shadows and all. She rose on her toes and kissed him softly, sweetly, a promise sealed with the press of lips and the whisper of breath. The question is, will you take me? His answer was to kiss her back with 20 years of loneliness and longing, with gratitude and desperation, and something that might have been redemption. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers and spoke the words she had been waiting her whole life to hear. Yes, yes, Lydia, who prays for the forgotten, who believes in redemption for the damned. Yes, I will take you, and keep you, and love you for whatever time God grants us. Curse or no curse, blessing or no blessing, yes. They were married 3 weeks later in the chapel where they had first met, with the villagers as witnesses and roses from the wild garden adorning the altar. Marguerite had departed in high dudgeon, declaring that she would not remain to watch her nephew ruin himself with an unsuitable marriage. The village priest performed the ceremony with nervous hands, still not entirely convinced that the Lord of Ravenshollow was entirely human. But Lydia saw only Sebastian as they spoke their vows, his hand steady on hers, his voice clear and certain as he promised to love and cherish her until death parted them. When he slipped Elena's sapphire ring onto her finger, it fit as if it had been made for her, and she felt no jealousy for the ghost who had worn it first. Elena was part of their story now, a blessing rather than a burden, a reminder that love was precious precisely because it was fragile. They lived quietly at Ravenshollow, restoring the castle and its lands, opening their doors to travelers and neighbors, hosting harvest festivals and Christmas celebrations that became legendary throughout the county. Sebastian proved to be everything Lydia had believed him to be, not cursed but blessed, not damned but redeemed by love freely given and received. She bore him 3 children over the years, 2 sons with his storm-gray eyes and a daughter with her own dark hair and stubborn spirit. None died in infancy, none showed signs of supernatural affliction. They were simply children, precious and ordinary and perfectly human, evidence that the curse had existed only in Sebastian's haunted imagination. On summer evenings, when the roses bloomed wild in the garden and candles burned bright in the castle windows, villagers would sometimes glimpse them walking together among the flowers, lord and lady, equal and beloved, their laughter carrying on the wind like music. The old stories faded, replaced by new ones of kindness and generosity, of a love that had conquered grief and guilt to bloom like roses in unlikely soil. And in the chapel where they had first met, a new tradition arose. Young couples would come to pray for blessings on their unions, and sometimes they would find fresh flowers on the altar, white roses that smelled of hope and forever. The village children whispered that they were left by the Lord and Lady of Ravenshollow, who had learned that the greatest magic of all was choosing to love despite the risk of loss, to build something beautiful in the face of all the world's darkness. Some stories end with death, others with departure. This one ends with light, candlelight and firelight and sunlight streaming through tall windows where a woman who had once prayed for the forgotten now stood surrounded by family, by love, by a life she had never dared dream possible. In the end, Sebastian's curse proved to be his salvation, and Lydia's faith in redemption became the foundation upon which their happiness was built. The dead remained dead, as they always had, but the living learned to live again, and sometimes, in a world full of sorrow and loss, that is magic enough. If this story found a mirror in your soul, leave your comment and share. Sometimes, what hurts in us is what makes us most human.